Patrice, Naomi, and Layla, thank you so much for joining us here today. We appreciate it. So I think at the time when we were putting together this event, the 2024 race looked a little different. It looked a lot like the 2020 race, and there were two old white men running for president. Now you have Kamala Harris, obviously a South Asian Black woman running. You have Tim Walz, her VP, much younger, 60 years old, and J.D. Vance, who is a vice president on the vice presidential nominee on the GOP side, much younger, I think under 40 or just turned 40. So, I want to get all three of your takes on how this has really shaken up the race. It seems that now with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, Democratic voters in particular are energized. So I just wanted to go down the line, starting with you, Patrice. How has this shaken up the race in your view?
Well, first of all, thank you to American for inviting me here today. It's wonderful to see so many young people in the audience. In politics, relatability is critically important, and I think that too often politicians speak political speak, and the shift in this year's election has really energized the electorate because with the addition of Kamala Harris, there's a candidate who's extremely relatable.
Naomi Miguel. Good afternoon. My name is Naomi Miguel. I think for this question, I'm going to kind of relate back to my community. I was raised by a single mom, raised by my grandma with a lot of strong Native women. I went to an all-women's college in undergrad, and so women have always been empowered and seen in my eyes. So it's really great to see nationally that we're starting to put women back up at the top and in leadership positions.
Well, thank you to American and to Sine for having me. I'm Layla Zaidane with Future Caucus. And listen, I'll point us back to the poll that we're all here for, right? The number one trait that young people said they were looking for in their elected leaders is integrity and then authenticity. To your point about somebody coming into the race that people felt like they could relate to, or at least in a lot of ways disrupted this really stale, static matchup that we've all seen before with a new generation, a younger person. She could have passed for a millennial in my eyes. I didn't realize she was that age when she became the nominee. But I think when Vice President Harris became the nominee, it really disrupted something that felt old and inauthentic, and sort of replaced it with a matchup that I think brought a lot of joy and a lot of forward-looking momentum to the conversation.
Right. And Layla, you mentioned traits in particular, and I want to get to the issues. Obviously, we know that the issues are very important to this, but do you think, based on, I know you work with an organization that works to get younger people to run for office, and be lawmakers, how much does personality play into this? I mean, it seems that going back to 2016, a lot of these elections have been personality-based.
Yeah, well, so the reason that I got into this work is because my parents were born in Morocco. They immigrated to this country, and I grew up really proud to be an American. And what was behind that was a love of the opportunities that I had that my family in Morocco didn't. Sure, it mattered that the candidates who were making those decisions were relatable or looked like me, or I felt like I belonged. But at the end of the day, what they were doing mattered so much more. And I think when I look at our politics today, I see two problems. One, we don't have enough of the younger generation, young, diverse leaders who can get people excited. But then the ones that are there, and the 75% of state legislatures right now are older than 45 years old, are not delivering results in ways that make us excited to participate in our democracy. And so personality matters, but once you do, when you're in that chair, the political leadership of the people we elect matters so much more, I think, to young people and to people everywhere.
Naomi, I understand that you're fresh off the campaign trail. You were just in Arizona, a major battleground state this election. What did you see when you were on the ground?
So Arizona is a unique state, as all of you know, but it has a very unique history, specifically with Native American voting. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I wasn't considered a citizen of this country until 1924. So only 100 years ago. And even with that citizenship into this country, we were not able to fully vote. So in Arizona, we had two landmark cases that really helped Native Americans be able to register. The first one was in 1928. That was in the Gila River community. They put in a case, but the ruling of that case said that we weren't considered citizens of state and local governments because we were tribal citizens. It wasn't until 1948, where there was a Harrison v. Levine case on the state level that allowed a former World War II veteran was denied the right to vote, and because of that case, we are now able to vote today. So if you think about it in hindsight, that was only 72 years ago. So some of your grandparents may be that age. Your grandparent is a visual of my right to vote in Arizona. So I think when we're talking about these important landscapes and states, we shouldn't really exclude any of these Native voting communities. We always talk about Native Vote, and I think that's the event that I went to this weekend. We were able to see some of the grandchildren from some of those landmark cases, still making the case of making sure that we register to vote and still telling our youth that they have a voice through their vote. At the event, too, I was able to talk to some youth. They were very excited to actually start voting, but then there was also some youth who were very skeptical about voting. So it was an event that was very culture-based, so it didn't look like a voting, your regular voting rights or voting registration event, and it was very much culture-based. So we had a lot of traditional dancing. I'm barely getting over being sore from dancing. And so I think when we start thinking about our democracy and thinking about communities of color, that's going to look very different. And I think that we're starting to see that more represented in our government.
I think being sore from dancing is probably a good problem to have, maybe. Patrice, on representation, Black voters always play a pivotal role in every single election, but just going back to 2020, it was, remarkable to see in the primaries how, Congressman James Clyburn was able to galvanize many Black voters behind Joe Biden, and then in the general election in Georgia in particular, how Black voters showed once again in many ways they are the backbone of the Democratic Party. I wanted to get your sense as to how the NAACP is working to mobilize Black voters this general election, but in particular young Black voters.
So in motivating voters, we have to remember that relationships between people in community are critically important. And the NAACP focuses on relational organizing. So that is person to person. We have recruited about 100,000 volunteers over the past couple of months. And we are deploying those folks all across the country and in priority states so that people talk to their neighbors, people talk to members of their church, as well as young people talk to young people. We just completed a poll as well, 14.5 million Black voters. We'll be releasing data on that as well to identify the issues that are important to the electorate and also the messaging and how it's important to speak to those voters, because every message is not for every community. So for example, when we focus on intermittent voters or low propensity voters, voters that are not in every election. We know that the issue of economy is critically important for young people. Higher than that is racism and discrimination. And so how do we talk about and link the importance of voting to those issues that are at the top of people's minds?
You know, the poll that the American University and the Sine Institute did, you know, I mentioned this in the last panel, it showed 83% of young voters said they were worried about the state of the democracy. Obviously a pretty bleak number. And it seems that the political environment in this country is very bleak. I mean, just take this past week as an example, a lot of ugly, untrue claims about immigrants are being voiced at high levels, and then you have a second assassination attempt against a former president and a candidate. You know, I want to get all of your take on how the climate is playing with this voting bloc. And I asked Molly and Doug this earlier. Is it this motivating young voters to get out there and make a difference, to turn this around? Or in your experience, is this show young voters want to, they want to tune this out? They don't want to listen to the noise and the ugliness of all of this. Layla, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I know this question of like, well, oh man, things feel so exhausting. Why is that? And you know, you gesture wildly to everything around us. And it would be understandable if young people decided that they were going to check out. It would be the most rational thing if young people decided they were going to sit this one out. And instead, we're seeing them run towards the fire. We're about to release a report as well that we've been tracking year over year the number of young people running for office. And I'm optimistic that when young people today are seeing the problems and the gaps between what's happening in our institutions and what they want to see done, they're no longer just sitting back and waiting for somebody to come in on a white horse and save them. They're raising their hand, they're throwing their hat in the ring, and they are running for office. And so I feel like this is a call to action to young people, and young people are answering the call. Now, the second part of that I would say is it's not enough to just get more young faces and diverse people in office. Recruitment is only half the question. Retention is a big piece of it too. How do we help support younger leaders once they're in office to be the kind of political leaders that we know young people want to see, who have the ability to be open-minded and to work across the aisle on solutions? How do we support them in developing? And so I'm really optimistic and excited about young people this election cycle and in the future. And I think the big call to everyone is how do we help support them and keep them in office to help them have impact?
Right. Naomi, what's your take on that?
I think we're seeing a generation that has been deeply impacted by our voting. I say that in a sense from the Native youth perspective. With Native youth, especially Native youth who grow up on tribal reservations, you have to deal with the federal government layer of government. You have state level of government. And you have local and county levels of government. We're already talking about 5 layers of government. And then that's not excluding your tribal government setup. For my government, an example, we have 3 different layers. We have our village government, we have our district government, and then we have our overall tribal government. At that point, you're at 9 layers of government. So when you're talking about Native youth, they're always activated in voting, activated in being involved. And I think that that's holistically an Indigenous way of thinking of community, where we are accepting of both youth and elders and being the participating party in developing our government. But I think that that is now being seen on a national level. And I am very excited to see what our youth get involved in and see them excited to be out there talking to each other or even, messaging each other on social media. I think there's an energy there that we're going to see develop even bigger, and I'm very excited to see it. I think that our youth are going to be able to really develop ways to change our government, mainly because they've been impacted so early on of a lot of these policies.
Patrice, you've worked for lawmakers and have been involved in organizing. What does your experience teach you, or which direction does it guide you in this moment?
So I think we have to look back at history, and both millennials came of age during the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and then were growing into adulthood during the Obama years. Gen Z, right after, has seen that there are discrepancies between what politicians and electeds say and what they do. So if you sort of put those things together, people have gotten the message that being engaged, activating, being an activist is really useful activity. But social media and other influences have showed people that they need to really engage in order to move the needle. So the question then is how? Clearly, I think that a lot of our messaging about the importance of voting has gotten through. But I also think that because young people don't have the context of history, of seeing the democracy go up and down, that is the vulnerability that causes people to disengage. So, historically, at the NAACP, we, of course, believe in that arc of moral history continues to go up. We have experienced a slight downward period in the incidence of hate, the disengagement from people, but I also think seeing the engagement within the past month and the interest of so many young people, I think we're on the upswing again.
And Patrice, were you at all surprised at just the groundswell of engagement and enthusiasm there was for Vice President Harris? Just looking back at history, we haven't really seen anything like this before.
Well, we saw it in 2008 with Obama.
Okay, there, yeah.
And I think that young people, we should never make the mistake of thinking that young people are not paying attention. Young people pay attention, they read, and they watch what's going on. They understand that aspects of the political system are really broken, and I think that they're seeking answers and ways to fix it.
I guess I should clarify. So when Biden stepped down and Harris, sort of presumed her spot at the Democratic ticket, was that surprising to see that that groundswell of enthusiasm surround? It just seemed like it was night and day.
What was surprising was that there was not a circular firing squad among Democrats, and that often I think, and I could make generalities about both political parties, but I've never seen such rapid coalescing of opinion and enthusiasm rolled into the shift in candidates.
Right. Layla, you do a lot of work to recruit young people to run for office and to, seek office in state legislatures and U.S. Congress. And it was interesting. There was a memo sent out by the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee earlier this week, and it showed that 20% of their spotlight candidates, and as we all know, there's a lot of state legislatures, 20%, that's a big number, are young people. They're under 40 years old. That's compared to, only 6% of members of Congress, and there's only 2 governors under the age of 40. I mean, that's such a big number. Do you think in terms of engagement and getting these young people to, maybe go beyond voting and seek public office, does it start at the local and state level?
Oh, absolutely. I think that these are the roles that are often uncontested, actually. There are thousands and thousands of elected positions across the country, and a majority of them do not have an opponent. And so if a young person is looking for a way to have impact, the easiest way to feel it is in your community. It's the fastest way to create direct impact. And more than likely, there's an open seat to actually challenge. Future Caucus was founded because we saw political polarization as the single greatest threat to our generation. The more that people cannot agree on how to move solutions forward, the more nothing happens, and the more our generation gets left holding the bag. And, I think there's a lot of reasons for us to distrust government, our democratic institutions, and I think to actually feel at a local level what it is to be inside of a governing body, that also gives you an opportunity to make it really visible to other young voters. And it's, I had a mentor tell me once, you can't You can't talk your way out of a situation you behaved your way into. Can't talk your way out of a situation you behaved your way into. It's very good advice in general, but it's very true when it comes to losing the trust of voters. And so if we're going to earn that trust back, you have to behave in a way that earns that back. You have to deliver results. And I think at the local level for young people, it's an incredible opportunity to actually make that impact felt.
Naomi, I think unfortunately a lot of issues impacting Indigenous communities in the U.S. and North America and around the world, quite frankly, go undercovered by the media, by lawmakers. We've seen that Interior Secretary Deb Haaland has done a lot to draw attention to a lot of these issues. But what issues are most impacting these communities? What issues would you like to see changed in these communities?
Well, I think for Native youth, one of the top 3 issues that I hear from them is looking at climate change. Indigenous communities are deeply impacted by climate change, especially up in the Northwest and Alaska. They're feeling the impacts right now. There are villages that need to be moved because the erosion is happening. The second point that they always bring up is looking at mental health. When we're talking about looking at our history with the United States and looking at the impacts of the boarding school and what that has had with our generational trauma, a lot of our youth are very in tune with that and wanting to get more mental health abilities available for our communities. The last one is also international issues. The fact that we have social media and internet at our fingertips, a lot of our youth are very engaged internationally and wanting to get involved with helping other communities as well. So I think those are the top 3 issues that we see. I do want to just kind of note, you mentioned Deb Haaland. I used to be a congressional staffer, and I realized before she was elected, her and Sharice Davids, there was nobody in Congress that looked like me, and there was nobody in the federal government that looked like me. And so when we keep in mind historical ways we can change things, that change didn't happen for Native women until 2018 and 2021. So that's all this century. So I think when we're talking about communities of color and wanting to have change, I think that change is now, and I think that our youth are ready to step up and make that change.
Well, Patrice, Layla, Naomi, thank you so much. Before I let you guys go, we do want to do some Q&A with students and attendees here. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand, or do we have one right here? Oh, yep, sounds good. Wait for the microphone, sorry. Logistics.
Hi, thank you. So one question I have is actually regarding the Native American communities. As you know, they're right now like autonomous communities in the tribal areas, and it's all spread out. Is there a way to do more voter registration across for the tribal federation elections, in the sense that, the tribal leaders are elected by the community? So is there a way to get young people out to vote and to get them to stand for positions of elected office? Because since the young people there relate to the young people here, for example, Gen Z, because we're all so familiar in diversity and unity, Indian diversity, what strategies do you think we can take to have the tribal federations see more voter turnout for those elections?
That's a great question. The Biden administration has an executive order on access to voting. Within that executive order, there is a steering committee that was created to specifically look at Native community barriers to voting, and they created a report. And in that report, it doesn't mention, as you mentioned, a lot of transportation issues. So, for instance, my tribe is equivalent to the size of Connecticut, but not everyone there has a car. So when you're talking about voting locations, I think what everyone here can do on the ground is look at, if your community or county is near a tribal entity, how are you engaging that tribal leader and its community to making sure that voting locations are equally put so that people can access them equitably. A lot of my tribe, and my tribal leader was at the event this weekend, by the way, and so my tribe all tribal leaders are very much engaged in making sure that our Native youth are involved, but also making sure they're registered to vote. I think another part of that is making sure our local and state governments are engaging our tribal leaders on what the tribe wants and where the tribe needs those locations to be.
Yep, we have one over here.
Hi, I'm Howard, songwriter Howard, and a member of the Published Under Trouble.
Oh, sorry, I think they just will hear you better. My God.
Sure.
The suspense of your question.
So yeah, being that a lot of the momentum that started to pick up around the Democratic Party's campaign happened after the announcement of Kamala Harris being the being the presidential nominee, happened mostly because of the unknown sort of that she played. Not knowing like where her policies would align created a little bit of an excitement. So is it possible that there might be a little bit of a backslide with younger voters as she starts to align herself with more of Biden's more unpopular policies surrounding young voters, like Palestine and his immigration policies on the border?
I think that in any election, there's always a honeymoon and then there is fallout. So if that's seen with Kamala Harris, it will be very similar to any other election. That having been said, one of the reasons that it happens is because it is the whole idea of context. So who had civics in school? Just a few people had civics in school. So the whole idea of how government works, how it operates, what candidates and what politicians are actually able to do versus what they promise to do, there isn't a real good level set around that. So I think that it is inevitable that there will be some walk back from the honeymoon phase. But I also think that that's where it's incumbent upon folks who are voting to understand all the levers of government, the political process, in order to contextualize that.
I also think that you see polls sometimes that'll match up, a specific person on the right, and then it'll say against a generic Democrat. And then that number's higher than the matchup between a specific person on the left. And I think it's because there is no person out there that is going to satisfy what even just the people in this room all want, right? There's no perfect person that can encapsulate all of that. And so you start to see like drop off, right? When there's an issue that you're like, this is not okay. And then that person steps back because a person is imperfect and is going to have policy ideas that are at odds with some subset of people. I do think that that's where the leadership traits become really important, right? And so are you looking for somebody who's willing to be open-minded? Are you looking for somebody who's willing to listen and compromise? And does that become the more important driver of earning your vote versus maybe some specific policies that they have? And I think each voter has to make that trade-off for themselves, but that's where I see sort of the gaps and the opportunities is leaning into some of those leadership traits.
Hi, my name is Natalie. I'm a first-year Master of Public Policy student here at American. My question sort of ties into, hopefully, from the discussion about the Sine poll in the beginning. So Patrice mentioned a lack of historical perspective for youth voters, leading to pessimism and disengagement, which was a really interesting point and I think really salient for youth voters. And this was sort of reflected in the Sine poll, that youth have a frustration with leaders not listening to them or not talking about issues that are important to them. And then Layla also mentioned the threat of polarization. So how do you all think that youth voters should be thinking about the balance between integrity and authenticity, which were top qualities from the poll that youth voters desire, and balancing that with consensus building and governing across the aisle? So my question is, how should youth voters think about that, and how should candidates walk that tightrope as well?
I think this is such an incredibly important question because when I read the characteristics in terms of integrity being the highest value, I think there is nothing to negotiate when it comes to integrity with someone who's in political life, because you've got to believe what the person is, that they're going to do what they said that they're going to do. But our political system developed in a place that is a little different than we are now. Everyone believes that generally that they're right, that they have the right to have everything. And so our political system is based on compromise. And so compromise, the ability to govern, is critically important as well. Authenticity is great because nobody wants to be around a phony politician. But if someone is authentically screaming horrible things, or they represent values that are not aligned with yours, then that authenticity has limited value. So integrity, and I think the ability to govern, is critically important because most legislation, no one ever gets what they want wholesale. And compromise has to become part of the system again.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the hard things is a lot of the very unsexy work of our democratic institutions is actually connected to some of the problems that we all think are most important, but we just don't hear about them or talk about them or feel like we got to give our opinion on what they should do about them. And so I think my advice, and certainly this is what we try to do with Future Caucus and building bipartisan coalitions of lawmakers working on issues, is how do you co-create, how do you invite people in earlier in the process on those topics? You know, we heard a couple, housing, there's all sorts of things that are really, really important to people that involve kind of unsexy, like zoning reform or like, you know, pretty boring things. How do you meet people where they are? How do you make people feel like they belong in the decisions that are being made on their behalf? And how do you demonstrate, not in a top-down way, I think Molly mentioned that earlier in her panel about like not always being top-down, but actually bottom-up, inviting people and working on those issues. And then the outcome is going to be bipartisan. It's going to be a community-driven, cross-partisan outcome. It's a lot harder to do, and it's kind of sometimes a little unsexy because, like I said, nobody wants to like go to a, you know, dance party about zoning reform. But I think good leaders are the ones who figure out how to make it compelling and how to build a bigger tent around those specific issues.
I just want to share a story. It's not specific to voting, but I think it's more specific to leadership and having leaders in these positions. When I first got into this position, the first week I met with the Secretary of Education, and in his office he said, okay, what are these top things that you want to do for Indian education? And I listed out all the things that I was able to see happen during the pandemic, things that I even myself experienced as a Native student growing up. And he said, okay, I want you to forget all of those things, and I want you to talk to the stakeholders and talk to your community and find out what they want. And that's the type of leadership that we need. I've been very grateful to work for two different people who have that idea, and that community needs to be involved in our development of policy and government. And I think the more that we create that type of structure in our government, the better we have at getting all of your opinions into our government and being active. I think that's the other piece I'll say. A democracy requires us to have an active constituency. And so I think we need to have both to make sure that we have an equitable and government made of integrity.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, my name is Jada. I'm a junior political science and sociology student at Howard, and we're here with the Howard University Coalition for Good Trouble. Just like to say thank you so much again for having us here. And so we've spoken a lot about young people, and I really want to shift it a little bit to incorporate the intersectionality of young people into this discussion, focusing not just on the fact that we're young, but also race, sexual orientation, gender, just where we're at geographically in the nation. And so a lot of young people, especially young people of color, are registered to vote. Already we have been pre-registered since we were 15, 16 years old, depending on the state. And at Howard, we've been leading a voter registration effort for the past 4 weeks. And so I want to ask how do we focus or shift our narrative from focusing only on voter registration, which a lot of young people are, into actually a language that's enticing and influential and empowering to get people actually to the polls? What strategies in terms of language, but also actions, need to take place within our universities, within our churches, within our community groups that's not already happening right now?
I think you can center that a little bit on issues. I know, at least in my family, because we very much do talk politics at the table, we talk about different issues and where people are. And I think that kind of has lost sight a little bit, but I think it also includes being able to talk to your peers, but also talk to your peers respectfully and understanding that we may not have the same opinions, but that's also why we vote. So making sure that we're educating ourselves on the different issues, but also that we are talking to each other and holding each other accountable at making sure we're making action in our democracy.
One of the things that I loved about the Sine close-up poll was the focus on asking people sort of their opinions on a range of issues and how it affected them. I think the way that you engage those conversations is by starting at the point of agreement in terms of what are people's interests. And then it's kind of a step backward to reverse engineer to how you get there, because at the end of the day, the policy overlay is the false choice that people have been told they have to make, in that the interests of older people are opposed to the interests of younger people. One of the reasons that if you look at policy, so much money flows upward to upper income and upper age limit cohorts is because younger people are not really represented in that discussion. But if you look at the interests of younger and older people, it's economic security. So that's the point where that discussion really has to take place, because it's going to look different if you're younger or older. But what young people also have to understand is that not voting is allowing others to make those decisions for you. And the only way that the systems change are by that continual engagement.
I think we have one more over here. Thank you so much for hosting this discussion today. My name is Rashida Hassan. I am a first-year MBA student at BU. And I had a question specifically. It was kind of piggybacking off of what the young lady from Howard just asked, but it was specifically related to ways that millennials and Gen Zers can garner support from local nonprofits on the ground, on the state level, when we are bringing forth solutions to address voter engagement for our age range, but we may not be supported by those leaders who may be the presidents or the CEOs of these nonprofits that can make change. What piece of advice would you give to, or would you share with us that may come forth with solutions but may not be supported from those leaders in these roles?
So can you clarify trying to get like nonprofit leaders to help in voter registration drives or voter turnout drives?
Yes. So if there are a group of millennials who may have an event and ways to engage their own generation of people, and they're bringing their, for me, I want to partner with the nonprofit, but I've noticed that there's a bit of pushback from the leaders in the different nonprofits who are focused on voter engagement, but I don't know if it's because I'm a millennial bringing this forward and it's not the person that's over the organization or what, and how do I break beyond that barrier during this time, which is very crucial?
Yeah. I mean, you got to show them the receipts. Like, you have to demonstrate that you are credible, that you are power building, and that you have value, right? Like, you know it. The people that you're organizing know it. And I think it goes back to the, like, you can't talk yourself, or you can't talk your way out of a situation you behaved your way into. You need to show them actions that you have led, that you can do to demonstrate what is possible and what is capable. And I would say, if you're running up against a no with somebody, that's not a reason to just like give up, but there are other ways to build coalitions that then just build power sort of without that person. It's true inside the legislature, it's true outside the legislature.
Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much to Molly and Doug and to everyone who worked on the Sine Institute poll. And Amy as well. Thank you so much. You are obviously a critical part in this, and to our partners at the Hill as well. Thank you so much to everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Make sure that everybody here knows that we believe at the